Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining AMADC's educational webinar, and welcome to the educational webinar. Welcome to the new Now Strategies for Marketing in a Post-Pandemic World. My name is Isaiah Donaldson, and I'm the VP of Programming for AMADC. To all of our members on the webinar, so great to have you back with us today, and a big welcome to all of our non-members and first-time guests. Glad you were here too. A little bit about us. We're the DC chapter of the American Marketing Association. We focus on providing education, career resources, and networking opportunities for our marketers here in the DMV. We're a volunteer-run organization, so there's always a lot of opportunity to get involved in our community. I'll hang around at the end of the session, and if there's any questions that you have about AMADC, feel free to ask me. For everyone's reference, we'll be sending out a recording of the presentation and PDF slides so you can access those after the session. I'm very excited to welcome our speaker, Patrick King, AMADC's current president, and also the founder and CEO of Imagine, a branding and marketing agency. Patrick will be presenting an excellent topic that can provide so much insight for us as marketers. Patrick, I'll let you take it away.
All right. Thanks, Isaiah. Real quick, a little about me. As Isaiah said, I'm a founder of an agency that's based in Northern Virginia. We've got offices throughout Virginia. This headshot is kind of what I look like right now, only I decided to grow a pandemic beard, and as long as this pandemic goes, the longer my beard grows, so I probably need a new headshot. Today, we're going to cover two things. It's mainly a three-part agenda. We're going to cover the impact of everything that's happened in these few months on the customers we serve, and how we as marketers can best meet those changes. The Great Recession, as with all recessions, was financially driven. And while we are dealing with a financial crisis this time, we also get the bonus of navigating a public health crisis. For the first time in any of our lives, we've been collectively afraid to go outside, to go to the grocery store, to interact with people outside of our immediate families for fear of feeding a global pandemic. This type of an event, of course, affects people much differently than a solely financial crisis, since it's not just the fear of making ends meet or fear of balancing the bottom line. It's coupled with the desire to be safe, feelings of immobility and helplessness, the uncertainty of when we'll be able to live normally again. The effect of these collective emotions make connecting with customers nowadays a more complex issue than simply having less money. So let's take a dive into the current state of the consumer and what we can expect reasonably as we go into the future. This past Friday, McKinsey released an update to their ongoing consumer pulse survey that they've been running as we've been, over the past few months. And general optimism about the future actually remains somewhat steady, with the majority of respondents having a strong sense that the economy is going to avoid a long-term recession. And maybe much of that optimism comes from the financial support we're getting from federal or local governments, things like unemployment benefits, PPP, and stuff like that. Even as states opened back up a few weeks ago, only to close again, the movement in this data, it remained constant, suggesting that once we're able to get the pandemic under control, the economy should experience a pretty decent rebound in terms of timeline. Now, it won't be quick, it won't be universal, since different areas and industries will recover at different rates. But once the cause of the economic crisis is contained, we can see that recovery will occur. Now, when we're able to get COVID to a more endemic status, meaning it goes from mass outbreak to something more similar to like the seasonal flu, when that happens is really anyone's guess. As we all know, there are just too many variables. But The takeaway here is that consumer confidence, which is a powerful economic indicator, it's a reliable barometer of purchasing behavior, we can see that that's holding on. Now, what we as marketers need to prepare for is the long-term change in routines as a result of all this. While optimism is high, the changes that people have made in their routines are going to have a lasting impact. We saw with like the Great Recession that it spawned this gig economy with people moving in droves to opportunities of self-reliance. So think of Uber, Fiverr, other freelance type jobs in this new industry. As a result of what we're seeing today, routines are going to change and have lasting effects. Now here, this is in that same study, we can see that the impact of this crisis will have a greater impact on how purchases are made instead of whether or not they're made at all. Over 2/3 of respondents in the same survey expect their routines to be different for over 4 months, which is actually up 3 points from the same survey given a couple weeks ago. But what's surprising is over a quarter don't see much of an impact on their finances, with almost half seeing that if there is an impact, it's not going to last more than, say, 90 days, which is pretty unique to this situation. It means that the issue for marketers isn't so much that people aren't spending. True, there is a drop in a lot of verticals, but what's really important to take from this is that they're spending differently. Priorities have certainly changed, but both optimism and spending habits they're holding stronger than expected, and definitely different from what we've seen in recessions of the past. So, change in routines, right? What does that mean? We all know that a shift to digital is happening. We're all pretty aware of that, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. And with many of us on this call, we're already focused on digital as a means to market anyway. All I'll point to is the change in the use of technology and how that's accelerating. With fewer people in offices, a jump in the already growing use of mobile devices for businesses has caused an equal increase in investments for mobile-friendly websites, social media, display advertising. And we can see that in the recent CMO survey report last month on how marketers are more rapidly shifting their investment to reach mobile users. And this is happening in B2B, B2C products, services, kind of across the board. And it's really surprising to see that what we've seen over the years as just like incremental growth, has jumped significantly as a result of this. Another change we need to be aware of is what our customers are now valuing more than ever. In that same CMO survey report, we see that while price sensitivity has certainly occurred, it pales in comparison to how consumers are valuing how much they trust a company or the relationship they have with a brand. Now, usually in hard times, trust does matter, yes, but low price typically matters significantly more than it does in this case. So this preference and how it beats out price sector seems to be stronger in the B2B space. And I know there are a number of B2B professionals on this call, and especially in industries like construction and law, relationships have been kind of the primary driver, like the standard for quite some time. So this should give some reassurance that trust is still much more important than cost. There are also some takeaways for nonprofits, more specifically like membership organizations, kind of like AMADC. Seeing the priorities that B2B and B2C consumers place on their purchasing decisions tells us that things like the value of membership, promoting benefits of relationship building, and helping people establish reputation within their industry can help potential members in joining, and it can help retain current members as well. So we know that spending, while definitely impacted by the pandemic, hasn't halted as much as what we've seen in the past. We also know that many of the industries that were hit hard back then aren't affected so hard today. Consumer optimism is holding strong. More concern is placed on behavioral change than financial change, and that trust, the relationship between the customer and the brand, is far more important than price. So, how do we as marketers take action on that? How do we respond to the changes that we see? I think the first thing that we should avoid is marketing as usual, ignoring that this change is happening. As I mentioned, changes in behavior will outlive changes in the economy. And the sooner that we can adapt to them, the more successful we'll remain as marketers. The best way to make the changes needed is to kind of begin the shift in strategy from being business-centric, meaning focused on your offerings, certifications, past performance, features, yada, 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 to a more customer-centric approach. Now, I'll challenge you for a moment when I say that many marketers are certain that their business is customer-centric, but let me throw something at you. When you introduce your business, whether it's on your website, in collateral, whatever, how do you speak about it? Do you talk about the history of the company, the significance in its industry, or what the company specializes in? Does the collateral cover more about what the business offers or what the business has done in the past than what the customer's needs may be? Which do you lead off with? And that's the difference. When you're in the mode of being business centric, you're focused on how important the company is, putting the business front and center. With a customer-centric focus, you shift the conversation to lead with more of the needs, the desires, the overall experience, and all the nuances of the customer first, then how the business can address those needs. Your business introduction begins with an understanding of an important customer concern, like the value they get out of a purchase, or maybe leading with a pain point. You see, you're not just putting the customer at the forefront of the marketing when you do this. You're placing them at the core of why your business exists. This fundamentally transforms the way and the reason why your organization does business. And think about like the mighty tech giants, Apple, Amazon, and whoever. They talk less about what they offer and more about what their customer may need or want or aspire to. And that is customer centrism. We as a society are wiser than ever to shallow marketing tactics. If you remember back in 2017, there was a gloriously tone-deaf Pepsi campaign with Kendall Jenner, and that serves as a prime example of what a lack of substance or understanding of your customer kind of shows how that can backfire in a spectacular way. And if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to look it up, as well as the backlash that resulted from it. And there's still backlash to this day because there's a lot of what they depict in the commercial we're experiencing now. And so even 3 years later, which is a lifetime in advertising world, it still maintained its notoriety. We can sense insincerity, and maybe we've grown more cynical, but getting a customer's trust takes a lot more nowadays. And since it's trust our audience clearly values more than most factors, we have to earn it the right way. Customer centrism is a change from selling to serving. And your business model, maybe not just your marketing, will need to adapt to that. So let's go over some strategies that you can use to shift into that customer-centric approach. First, you have to know about your customer. And this is a persona builder that we use in the early stages of campaigns here at Imagine. And it helps us to determine the needs and values and desires, and ultimately what fulfillment means to each type of customer in an organization, customer of an organization. It helps us determine where, when, and with what type of messaging we can best communicate with. You'll see here, I'm not going with a specific business. We work with a lot of localities on either tourism or economic development. And it's often a greater challenge to attract somebody to a place, which is a cluster of businesses, than it is to just one business. So I'm really testing the approach here. We have what we know as their methods of communication, where they do their research, their personal interests, and then two of what we consider to be the key defining factors you must have in determining a persona, and that is what their goals are, what their objectives are, and then what they see as the biggest challenges to meeting those goals. Because if you know those two, if you know what they want to accomplish and what stands in the way, you can speak to that goal, you can speak to that objective, and then work to remove those challenges. We'll come back to this persona in a minute, but when I say each type of customer, let me illustrate. Let's take a major B2B industry like architecture, engineering, construction. In that industry, you'll have some obvious personas, groups that value certain things more than others, and they'll all be a little different. For example, a developer is going to be more like a property commercial developer is going to be more concerned about like long-term investment potential of a space, while something like a jurisdiction, like a city or a town, is going to be more concerned about the building being up to code. If you run something like a nonprofit, you're going to have small donors, large donors, sponsors, members, volunteers, influencers, and so on. And for each of those personas, they're going to have different priorities, and they're going to have different needs. They're going to have different goals and different challenges. For the purposes of our previous persona, let's take a look at the challenges of a destination. And there are a lot of things to consider there as well. We have, different age, family sizes, income, financial mobility, personal affinities, hobbies, emotional drivers. And each of these groups has different motivations, levels of involvement, and desired outcomes. So it's important from the jump to create separate personas within your overall audience. And where you get all this data on where they're most active or the kind of content they care about really depends on how you've been marketing in the past. A lot of it is mainly online, but speaking with the people on your front line, like your business development, or in the case of a lot of nonprofits, your resource development teams, can also give you insights to round a lot of these out. And what I'm showing on the screen are just common platforms where you can get a lot of the information to build out these personas and a lot of the data that you can get from those. For, say, financial history, of course, there's QuickBooks, or for larger organizations, a conversation with your finance department. And these are just the platforms. I'm sure that everyone on the call has industry publications or historical data for your audiences that can help as well. So now, once this is done, you'll have a clear vision of your customers, not just their needs and activities and preferences, but you'll also have a closer idea of how they've changed. And now, so what do we do with this data into something that's actionable? And what we use is something that's typically pretty traditional. It's the trusty sales funnel, marketing funnel, customer journey, workflow. It has a ton of different names, but I'm sure that many of you are familiar with this. The purpose of this is to craft and track each step of a customer's experience with your organization so that the entire experience is designed for them, for their enjoyment, and making sure that their needs are recognized and addressed, and that stays at the center of your marketing activity. So we populated the journey with the tools and tactics we know will help us reach the previously defined persona. For example, this is there's travel. There's a lot of small business involved. So using things like Instagram and Yelp, reviews, ways to conduct a lot of the business online, reservations and promotions, things like that would be really important in this case. So next, we'll place our KPIs in there for each tactic. So that way we know quickly how well we're doing in those areas. And they'll be different for each step, of course. For instance, for a lot of the top of funnel, we're going to focus on things like audience growth, right? Engagement, that sort of stuff. But as we go deeper into the funnel, we'll start to see more financial and more concrete indicators. So you'll have your cost per lead, your cost per conversion, overall revenue, that sort of stuff. Finally, we'll go a step further, and this is where we start to design the customer experience. How can we use each stage as an opportunity to do something that our audience thinks is remarkable, that's unique? In doing so, we're going beyond what competition may be doing in these channels to create something that's both unique, it's interesting, but it's also, and more importantly, tailored to the interests of that particular audience. Things like, for tourism and jurisdictions, things like scavenger hunts or games that people can easily and comfortably use to engage in a new area. It's a big help for first-time visitors to an area. Depending on the complexity of your organization or the length of your sales cycle, simply the personalities of your personas, this can become more serious. It can become more complex. And increased complexity, it's fine. It's not necessarily something to be afraid of, since a lot of the work that you can do at each stage of the journey can be either automated or used over and over without developing new pieces for each opportunity. And it's good to try to, while you are remaining unique, in some ways you need to remain consistent, because that's how you judge your success over time. And this is what makes a customer-centric experience. It takes into account what we know has changed about our customers, and puts their desire for trust, as well as any nuances that we discover and need to consider. It puts all them at the center of our marketing. Now, when you follow this approach, you'll notice a few benefits kind of spawn on their own. Since your brand, your purpose, relies on a deeper understanding of your customer, you'll look through the trends more frequently, the trends that I went through earlier in this presentation. You'll look them out and you'll uncover deeper motivations, which is understandable because you'll be focusing more on your customer anyway. As it evolves, some things you'll notice are the evolution of your business offering will be more in response to what the customer wants and needs, making your brand more flexible and ultimately more powerful over time. Brands that are committed to customer centricity naturally concentrate on how the customer changes and then develops their offerings based on those changes. You'll develop mutually beneficial business relationships that are designed to maximize the customer's experience. Your criteria for partnering with other businesses will go beyond just like the quality of that other business's work, in order to go deeper into areas like how they treat their customers and if their brand dovetails in with yours, or how their treatment of the customer, and then how that dovetails into your own approach. Also, your customer churn rate, the rate at which customers leave and need to be replaced, that churn rate will start to plummet, because by building deeper connections with your customers, fewer of them are going
Hot call 1826, got 1826.
Really? All right. And while you're bringing in new customers and keeping those, the business grows. And in doing so, you're increasing your lifetime customer value, which means that you get to meet your financial goals more consistently. Now, in conclusion, this pandemic has cast a spotlight on the human side of the marketing experience. We've all wanted to know our customers better, but I think this makes it even more pressing. We always remember the interactions that we've had with a company based on how we felt, but it's now more important than ever. Those experiences, positive or negative, they're born of intensity and can often happen in stressful times. Those experiences are persistent, and if you meet your customers' needs in this moment of heightened vulnerability and go the extra mile, the emotionally evocative nature of those actions can generate a positive brand affinity that will last long after COVID-19 passes. And with that, I will gladly take any questions. And I guess you can pop them in the chat if you have them. All right. Well, if there aren't any right now and you think of any, my contact information is here, and looks like Joy has a question.
Yeah, can I ask you a question?
Go for it.
Yeah, Patrick, so a question for you is that when I typically see companies communicating during the customer journey, they don't seem to match the place in the journey with the kind of asset they're using, even if they are customer-centric. So as an example, a lot of times I'll see case studies communicated in that early stage of awareness. And while it's good to know that somebody's aware of the problem you're having, it doesn't address the awareness level concerns that are more like, how just other things the customer would have that I think could be better addressed in other assets. And I'm not sure what those are. So that's my question for you, is in a very convoluted way, I'm asking what kinds of assets can be used at each step of the customer journey to sort of communicate well the need to be customer centric.
I think that, we'll see if this answers this question. I think early in the journey, you have to help establish relevance before you go into things like past performance and reputation. You have to make sure that the need is there, and that there is some greater awareness of what the brand is and how it meets customer needs before you go into this is how we've done it in the past. I think there's a lot more that needs to go into establishing a relationship with a customer and jumping to things like case studies, although that's been a traditional way to like reinforce trust. I think that other things need to be done first. And I think that's where a greater understanding of these personas, and maybe talking more about their goals and objectives and the challenges that are in the way, that needs to happen, and that needs to be established before you go into, as I said before, kind of talking about yourself and the stuff that you've done and all that stuff.
Right. So what kind of assets do you find, what kind of communication pieces do you find that kind of do that successfully in that awareness, or just before they're ready to purchase. Since case studies, you're right, they show like, okay, this is how we've solved the problem. But what kinds of things are good earlier on in the journey for companies to use to communicate being customer centric?
I think things that are maybe a bit more, I don't know, like things that are maybe a little less analytical. I think you need to, just like with all things branding and marketing, there needs to be some sort of a emotional connection before you start to go into more logical stuff like your past performance. So the tools that you would use would be, take a look at what you're currently using in all of your marketing and advertising, and make sure that from the very beginning you are, whether it's your as I said, whether it's your website or whether it's your social, that you're communicating, that you understand the challenges and the goals and the aspirations of the customer, so that the time for case studies comes after they start their research phase, and when they start seeking that out.
So it sounds like it's more appropriate at those earlier stages to use things like really short messaging and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a really interesting analogy that I had just that I talked about in a YouTube video I did recently. It's about the elephant and the rider, and about how the elephant maybe represents the more emotional and like intuitive part of the mind, and the rider that sits on top of this mighty elephant is very logical. So they know where to go and the steps they want to take, and everything's very logical. But what happens in real life is that when a rider sits on an elephant and an elephant wants to turn left and the rider wants to turn right, they're following the more emotional side. It just happens more naturally. So we need to be aware that that's how people typically act, whether we're talking about buying a pack of gum or buying a car. It's just how they work. They want to feel an emotional bond before logic even kicks in and tries to justify making that purchasing decision.
Yeah, I think that's an appropriate case study also, because that in itself to me is a solution that companies should be using things like really short videos and things like that early on to sort of make people aware, of possible solutions for the problem before, getting into those case study kinds of assets later on.
Yeah, all that stuff, there is a place for it, but all too often it happens too soon.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't want to monopolize the conversation, so that's it.
Fine. So Wendy has a question here. What are customers asking for from Imagine during the pandemic that are different from what they were asking the firm to do in the past, and how are we addressing it? So in normal times, we're asked far less, although it's still important, we're asked far less for how we see the landscape, how we understand how a specific industry is working. Because I guess when things are going well or moderately well, the clients they make a lot of assumptions. So those conversations are typically shorter. What we're asked to do a lot more now is provide perspective and insight, and try to get a grip of kind of like what this talk is about. It's about understanding how things have changed and how a company needs to adapt to that change, instead of just growing an audience, or just growing a contact list, or just increasing conversions. You have to go back to square one, and that's what we're being asked to help clients out with a lot. All right, great. Well, if there are any other questions, my contact information is on the screen, and also, as Isaiah said, The recording and the slides will be shared out to everyone on this call. And with that, I thank you all for your time.